Hey there and welcome to another edition of Battlefield 101. This episode is going to continue our feature on tanks, and in particular how the driver and the gunner should be working together in order to achieve success and thrive on the battlefield whilst also staying alive. Because despite the amount of firepower that a tank possesses and the fact that it's an armoured vehicle, it can be pretty easily taken down if the gunner and the driver aren't working together effectively. So we're going to show a few techniques which ought to be basics, and how to stop the tank being taken down so easily. And the first one is pretty simple. It's something that everybody should do. It's all about spotting. So what should the gunner be doing while the tank driver is involved in vehicular combat, particularly against another tank or LAV? Well, you ought to know by now that the 50 cal machine gun mounted for the gunner does 0 damage to armoured or even lightly armoured vehicles. It can hurt jeeps and it can damage choppers, and sometimes is enough to be a deterrent, but isn't very damaging in its own right. But what the gunner is better served doing is scanning around the environment, particularly around the sides and the back where the driver isn't focused, and is looking for C4 runners and rocketeers or anybody else who can potentially hurt and kill our tank. So as you can see from this clip, I've spotted the enemy. A little red triangle has appeared above his head. I've let my driver know he's there, despite the fact that he's flanked from the blind side, and he could have been a C4 runner, could have been a rocket spammer looking to put rockets in the rear end of the tank and do some real damage. But just by letting my driver know that that enemy was there, we managed to avoid being killed, got the kill ourselves, and lived to fight another day. There is more for the gunner to be doing than just simply scanning, spotting, and maybe putting some rounds into people. You may need to do repairs in the middle of a firefight, which is a pretty dangerous thing to have to be doing. However, it is necessary to keep the tank alive, and to give you a better chance of this, I will highlight some techniques which will improve your chances of surviving whilst in mid-repair. Now, the first thing to learn is how to actually get out of the tank and begin the repair process in the first place. Now, this clip is to illustrate the wrong thing to do. As you can see, I jumped out of my tank in front of it and was caught in the shell blast, which killed me instantly, costing my team a ticket, cost me a life, and makes my tank much more vulnerable. The correct thing to do is, from the gunner's seat, turn the turret away from the direction of the combat, in this case it's to the rear of the vehicle, and then press the exit button. That gives me a chance to jump out of the vehicle away from the line of fire from the tank and begin the repair process. Now, there is a technique to employ which improves your repair efficiency. Each time you use a blowtorch as a repair tool, there is a cooldown period if you hold it down for too long. So the way to counteract this is to count off 10 seconds as you repair, release, and then start the repair process again. And it just saves down a cooldown period which goes on too long. From there you can see the difference that a repairer can make against a vehicle that doesn't have one. In this instance just illustrates the incorrect technique, which is to hold down the repair tool until it stops repairing and then goes into its cooldown period, which is longer than letting it go into a cooldown manually. In this instance, we still get the victory in this little one-on-one firefight because the enemy vehicle doesn't have a repairer. But what it does, using this incorrect technique, is it keeps the firefight going longer than is necessary. Remember, the tank is more vulnerable, as is the repairer, who is vulnerable to enemy attacks from behind while they're stationary and can't see around them. Now, the last thing I want to discuss in this episode is staying mobile and using third-person view. We talked about in the previous episode using first-person view when travelling from place to place in order to make it easier to spot for mines and such things like that. But when you're fairly stationary, like on an objective like this where we're fighting for the flag, it's easier to use third-person view so you have a larger peripheral vision of where the enemy is if they happen to start contesting the flag like they are in this instance. I do not want to be caught out by a C4 runner. I do not want to be caught out by somebody firing rockets from the rear end. So I want to use all the visual references that I can in order to keep enemies spotted. And I'm staying mobile so I'm not an easy target. If it's a C4 runner, I want to be able to get away or potentially get a road kill. If it's a rocket spammer, again, I do not want to be an easy target for him. I want him to be a moving target so I'm not as easily caught out by that rocket. Now here's why I like to stay as mobile as possible on Battlefield 4 running the tank. As you can see from this clip, it actually takes a long time for this tank to build up enough speed in order for me to outpace even just a foot soldier. And if he'd have been trying to drop C4 on me, I'd probably be about dead by now. But not only that, as you can see there, the splash damage is not as good as it ought to be in this game for a tank. One shell was not enough to get a kill, and in fact even though shell number 2 was a complete miss, it actually takes 2 more shells for me and a lot of manoeuvring in order to get a kill on just one foot soldier, which just goes to illustrate just how important it is for both gunner and driver to be working together in unison and communicating in order to make sure that the tank stays alive. The tank is definitely vulnerable in this game, probably more so than in Battlefield 3. There are 2 types of soldier that can carry C4. The engineer has an awful lot of rockets at his disposal in order to take out tanks. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Battlefield 101. I hope you've learned something that will potentially make driving tanks a more viable prospect, and I will see you on the next edition of Battlefield 101.